Hi, I'm Chad, and in this video we're going to explore why a warehouse is more than just a large box. More specifically, we'll talk about the differences between a warehouse, a distribution center, and a fulfillment center. First, let's do a quick recap of what industrial real estate is in a broader context. Warehouses are one of the three main categories, with manufacturing properties and flex properties being the other two. Manufacturing properties are where things are made, assembled, or produced. Think of raw or semi-raw materials being worked on and upgraded to the next stage. It can be anything from a small machine shop that fabricates steel, all the way up to the Boeing factory, which builds airplanes. Flex properties are buildings zoned industrial, which are used for purposes other than manufacturing or warehousing, which we'll talk about here shortly. Examples of flex properties can include buildings used for suburban office space, research and development, self-storage, bottle depots, art galleries, or churches. Think of flex as a miscellaneous catch-all category. Now over to warehouses, and I often describe them very simply as buildings where things are stored for some period of time, whether it be a few months or a few hours. But why are there so many different terms when it comes to something so seemingly simple? Well, before we unpack it, just a few things to note. First, there are some important nuances to be aware of, but there are also numerous similarities between all of them. And second, there are no standard definitions, so it may vary depending on your market or even depending on what company that's providing the information. But as we go through these, it should become more clear what each of them are in a broader sense. Let's start with a warehouse, which in the most basic sense is a property used for the storage of goods. This inventory can be held for an extended period of time before being shipped to customers or retail locations or to manufacturers who need it for production. Warehouses can be of any size. For example, the first industrial investment I bought was a small 2,000 square foot warehouse condo where the tenant at the time stored kitchen equipment parts. It just had racks and racks of parts, some of that were needed quite often, while other parts probably sat on those shelves for years. A warehouse can also be quite large. Picture a clothing supplier who keeps inventory on hand for seasonal changes. They might have winter inventory sitting on the shelves for several months before they need to send it to customers or to retailers. With a warehouse, think of it more as a building with relatively limited activity. There'll still be workers and forklifts moving around, but the products that get stored there are intended to be there for a while. In contrast, a distribution center is primarily focused on the efficient movement and distribution of goods. These buildings can be called logistics hubs as they serve as a central location for the transportation of goods to multiple other locations. When you think of a distribution center, envision a building where there's a constant movement. Goods get delivered to the building, at which point they might be stored for a short period of time, and then they get sent out. This leads to the closely related category of fulfillment centers, which have similar internal processes yet different objectives. Distribution centers can essentially ship to anyone, be it customers or retailers or even other distribution centers, while fulfillment centers are focused on delivering products directly to the customer. Whether it's a DC or FC, there are some companies that might receive product, break it down, and repackage it, and then virtually send it out right after. This is a process called cross-docking, and it can be a shipping door immediately opposite the receiving door, or it can just be another set of doors adjacent to the receiving doors. Let's walk through an example to help this sink in. Let's say you order a shirt on Amazon. Here's the path it might take going from the factory floor to your front door. Real quick interruption, but leave me a comment below and let me know if you prefer buying things online or in the store. Let me know what the last thing you bought is as well. I'm curious to hear. Assuming the shirt was made overseas, which involves a network of industrial properties itself just to get it to the port. But let's fast forward it to that shirt making its way to a port in North America, where it gets moved to a distribution center alongside thousands of other identical shirts. It won't spend much time in this DC before it's moved by truck or rail to the next location. It might be in one or several more DCs before getting close to you, and at that point it might be transferred to a warehouse space if the company doesn't think it will sell right away. At some point though, it will likely be in an FC where the online order triggers Amazon to dispatch the shirt right to you. Conversely, if you bought it at a store, it could have went on a very similar journey, only that the retailer might have had the product sitting in their own warehouse, or tucked away in the back of the store, or even on a shelf. With that overview in mind, we can now explore the definitions of these properties and see how they can vary quite a bit. One international brokerage refers to buildings with 300,000 or more square feet as big box industrial and notes that these buildings have ceilings of 28 feet or higher and they're built using precast or tilt-up concrete construction. Another international brokerage says that big box facility is a traditional warehouse or distribution center of at least 200,000 square feet. A third large company uses 100,000 square foot buildings as the benchmark for what they call grade A quality distribution units. NAIOP, conversely, has a matrix describing industrial building types where it says warehouses or distribution centers can be of any size, whereas a fulfillment center is anything greater than 100,000 square feet with 32-foot ceilings. Lastly, we could look at a definition provided by CNBC where they sort of suggest the opposite, saying a warehouse is a distribution center over 200,000 square feet. So what's the correct answer here? Well, the reason that there isn't a consensus on this is that these are relatively arbitrary numbers. A company that says the cutoff of 200,000 square feet would surely concede that a 190,000 square foot building is still in that ballpark. In other words, these numbers are helpful estimates, but there's a generous amount of leeway here. It might be more helpful to instead look at what's happening inside of the building. Or stated another way, what does a company plan to use the building for? If the company just needs a space for warehousing, they might be able to get by with a very basic building. Whereas if they need it for a fulfillment center, they'll likely need to have robotics, automation, conveyor systems, advanced racking systems, and so on. So while the intended use will vary, conceivably the same building can be used for multiple different purposes. That's because there's a lot of similarities in the building, whereas each individual company will install different systems and have different processes and procedures for how they move goods around. Naturally, location plays a pivotal role in this process, but assuming the company has already identified the area they want to be in, then size will be the next major factor. As an example, a 20,000 square foot building might work great for a company to store products, but it won't be nearly enough space for a company like Amazon to use it as a fulfillment center. But again, it can also work the other way. If Amazon decided they no longer needed a 1 million square foot building they were using, they could easily repurpose that building for storage or for warehousing. It might be the Cadillac of warehouses, but it would still serve that purpose. In other words, one business might look at a building simply as a place to store their inventory, whereas another company might see the exact same building as a site where they can actively receive packages, break them down, repackage, and have them sent out to the next destination. A key takeaway here is that while there are differences between warehouses, distribution centers, and fulfillment centers, a large part of it comes down to what happens inside the buildings themselves. One last quick interruption as I realized I didn't have a good summary on all of this. So for a warehouse, you can look at it as a building for long-term storage. A distribution center is going to be used for short-term storage, but the company will likely have some value-add activities in there, such as repackaging, sorting, even cross-docking. A fulfillment center is similar to that, also short-term storage, but the end user is going to be the customer, as these are typically used to fulfill e-commerce orders. And lastly, I would look at any building over 100,000 square feet as big box industrial, but there's no standardized definition of that. It's important to understand some of the specific criteria companies look for when leasing or purchasing industrial real estate, such as the number of loading doors, ceiling heights, and column grid, to name a few. So check out this video next where I go into these topics in more detail.